In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar was fighting for his life, not against barbarians in distant Gaul, but against fellow Romans in a brutal civil war. His opponent was Pompey the Great, once his ally, now his mortal enemy. The two greatest generals in Rome were tearing the Republic apart, and their armies met at Dyrrhachium on the coast of what is now Albania. Caesar was in trouble. Pompey had more men, more supplies, and a better strategic position. The Pompeian forces had built fortifications and were slowly strangling Caesar's army. Caesar tried to break out, tried to turn the situation around, but nothing was working. His men were tired, hungry, and beginning to lose hope. One of Caesar's officers was a centurion named Marcus Cassius Scaeva. We know almost nothing about his background, where he came from, how he rose through the ranks. But we know what he did at Dyrrhachium, because Caesar himself wrote about it, and what Scaeva did was almost beyond belief. Caesar's forces were attacking a Pompeian fortification, trying to break through their lines. Scaeva was commanding a small fort, a redoubt that held a critical position in the assault. If his fort fell, the entire attack would collapse. Pompey's forces understood this perfectly, and they threw everything at Scaeva's position. The assault came from all sides. Pompeian soldiers, professional legionaries, just as well trained as Caesar's men, stormed the fort. Arrows filled the air like rain. Javelins thudded into wooden shields and flesh. The defenders fought desperately, but they were vastly outnumbered. Scaeva stood at the front, rallying his men, fighting with sword and shield. An arrow struck him in the eye. The iron point punched through, destroying the eye, and Scaeva staggered. Any normal man would have fallen, would have retreated to have the arrow removed and the wound treated. Scaeva pulled the arrow out himself and kept fighting. More arrows came. One struck him in the shoulder. Another hit his thigh. Scaeva's armor was already battered. His shield was splintered and studded with arrow shafts. Blood ran down his face from the ruined eye socket, soaked his tunic, pooled at his feet. Still he fought. The Pompeians pressed harder. They could see the fort was weakening, could see that the defenders were being cut down. A few more minutes and it would fall. They surged forward in a final push. Scaeva was now fighting with one eye, multiple arrow wounds, and a shield that was more kindling than protection. His men were falling around him. The situation was hopeless, but Scaeva didn't retreat. He didn't surrender. He stood in the gateway of the fort, his body blocking the entrance, and he dared the enemy to come through him. They tried. Pompeian soldiers rushed the gate, and Scaeva met them with his gladius. Despite his wounds, despite the blood loss that should have made him collapse, his sword arm still worked. He stabbed and slashed with mechanical precision, the product of decades of training. Every thrust found flesh. Every swing opened arteries. The ancient sources say he took 120 missile wounds. 120. Arrows, javelins, sling stones, they hit him over and over. His shield was pierced through, useless as protection, but still strapped to his arm. His armor was punctured in so many places it looked like a sieve. But somehow, impossibly, he remained standing. The Pompeians began to hesitate. There was something unnatural about this centurion who wouldn't die, who kept fighting when he should have been a corpse. The attack faltered, not because they couldn't take the fort, but because the men at the front didn't want to be the next to face that blood-soaked figure in the gateway. Then Scaeva did something brilliant. He called out to the Pompeian forces. He shouted that he wanted to surrender, that he was willing to change sides and fight for Pompey. He asked them to approach so he could negotiate terms. It was a lie, a desperate trick, but the Pompeians believed it. Why wouldn't they? Scaeva was clearly dying. His position was hopeless, and soldiers switched sides all the time in civil wars. Two Pompeian centurions approached the gate cautiously, ready to accept Scaeva's surrender. Scaeva waited until they were close, within sword reach. Then he struck. His gladius took the first centurion in the throat. The second tried to retreat, but Scaeva's blade caught him in the shoulder, nearly severing his arm. Both men fell screaming. The Pompeians, enraged by the deception, attacked again with renewed fury. But the brief pause had given Scaeva's men time to regroup, time to shore up the defenses. Reinforcements from other parts of Caesar's line arrived and drove the Pompeians back. The fort held. Because of Scaeva, because one centurion refused to fall, refused to let his position be overrun, the entire sector remained in Caesar's hands. When the fighting ended and Scaeva finally allowed the medics to treat him, they counted his wounds. 120 holes in his body, his shield pierced through in 230 places. His helmet was cracked and dented from blows that should have crushed his skull. He had lost his eye and would never see from it again, but he lived. Somehow, through luck or pure stubbornness or divine intervention, none of the 120 wounds had struck anything immediately fatal. He had lost blood, had been in unimaginable pain, but he survived. Caesar rewarded him generously. Scaeva received 200,000 sesterces, an enormous sum that would set him up for life. He was promoted from centurion of the 8th cohort to primus pilus, the highest-ranking centurion in the legion. Caesar praised him publicly, held him up as an example of Roman courage and discipline. But the Battle of Dyrrhachium was ultimately a defeat for Caesar. Despite Scaeva's heroics, despite the courage of his men, Caesar's forces were pushed back. He had to retreat and regroup. It was one of the few times in his career that Caesar lost a major engagement. Yet Caesar remembered Scaeva. When he wrote his account of the Civil War, his Commentary de Bello Chivalry, he devoted space to describing what his centurion had done. Other historians picked up the story. Appian, Plutarch, and others wrote about the centurion who took 120 wounds and lived. The story of Marcus Cassius Scaeva became legendary among Roman soldiers. He was proof that training and discipline and sheer willpower could overcome wounds that should be fatal. He was evidence that one man, in the right place at the right time, could change the outcome of a battle. But after Dyrrhachium, Scaeva disappears from history. We don't know if he fought in later battles of the Civil War. We don't know if he was at Pharsalus when Caesar finally defeated Pompey. We don't know how he died or where he's buried. We don't even know if he was able to enjoy the wealth and status Caesar gave him, or if more fighting claimed him before he could retire. What we know is that for one day, at one small fort, a centurion named Marcus Cassius Scaeva stood alone against an army and refused to yield. His body became a shield, his sword an impassable barrier. The enemy couldn't kill him, couldn't break him, couldn't move him. And because he stood, his men stood with him. Because he fought, they fought. Because he wouldn't surrender, they held the line. One centurion, bleeding from 120 wounds, his eye destroyed, his body broken, decided that the fort would not fall. And it didn't.